Hold on, hear me out. Would the Pelicans getting swept be a good thing? No, but I'm going to tell you why winning or losing doesn't matter for New Orleans in Game 4. It's a Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NolaJake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Monday. It is a game day for your New Orleans Pelicans. Do or die game, Game 4. They're down 0-3 to the Oklahoma City Thunder. We'll look at some changes that might be coming from head coach Willie Green, but I want to look at that in the third segment because New Orleans is in trouble in this series no matter what. And even if they win this game, I don't think we anticipate them winning this first round series. So I want to look at what that means for the offseason. By the way, today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and I'm a big fan of Monopoly Go. The mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly, so join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, whether it's this series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, not going too well, but what it means for the offseason too. And so even when the games end, we're going to be covering that here on Locked On Pelicans. So make sure you are an everydayer, and that means you listen Monday through Friday. If you are an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So one of the things I've had a lot of people ask me about the past couple of days is, would getting swept be a good thing for New Orleans? Would that be a good thing because of how embarrassing it is? The organization would then need to be forced to make changes because you can't keep going this way and all of that stuff, right? And I get the logic behind that, but here's what I'm going to say. I don't think winning or losing this game or even this series necessarily matters. When you look at a front office that's plotting a course for the offseason, they're doing that not just off of one playoff series, one game. They're looking at the whole body of work. And while very often we have some recency bias, we're prisoners of the moment of what we just saw. CJ really struggling, ignoring the fact that he was playing well before. How do you balance kind of those two things, right? You could look at just one, you could look at just the other, but that doesn't do you a whole lot of good. You have to take it in the context of the whole season. And so that's why if you get swept, it's not like it's so embarrassing for the team that, we'll definitely make big changes. I think they've already been wanting to make big changes and tried to make some big changes this past offseason and even at this trade deadline. So winning or losing this game doesn't ultimately matter. What I'm trying to say is I think they know they need changes and I think they know what they want to do. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the next segment here. And that this series, especially without Zion, where what are you supposed to read into it other than real bad play? I don't think that's something that's going to sway them on either direction. It goes both ways, right? So, if they were intent on, if they basically thought that Zion and BI don't fit, that you can't build a team around Brandon Ingram and let's look at him because he's the one playing, they've already made that decision. And this playoff experience just maybe reinforces it a little bit, but it doesn't change their mind. Goes both ways, though. If they've already been set on signing Brandon Ingram to an extension, and I would imagine they are, I don't think the series really changes that. And there's reasons for that sort of thing. If you just go off of a playoff series or a couple of games, that's how you end up giving Solomon Hill a 4-year, $48, $52 million contract because he got hot for 3 games in the playoffs to the Pacers, and then Dell Demps went and signed him for all of that money. What we've learned is you shouldn't be kind of prisoner of the moment with it. And while this is disappointing and this team has looked bad and it's been flat out, look, it's embarrassing, I think. Getting swept isn't a good thing. I don't think that's ultimately going to lead to this dramatic overhaul. I think they've wanted to make some changes already going into this. Does this mean maybe you have a different role for CJ? It could, but again, I think that's all part of their master plan and knowing how the front office and David Griffin like to operate. They're not going to look at just this small sample size here and go, this is what we've got to do going forward. I think they're going to look at the whole of the season. And I think that's the right way to do it. Part of it is also asset management with certain things too. You've got to manage your assets well, particularly because you're in a small market. The luxury tax is not a certainty or things like that. It's stuff that, whether fair or unfair, fun or unfun, you have as a reality of the situation and you need to take into account. And I think they're already kind of planning for that, right? That CJ extension isn't meant to keep him here for the entirety of his career, not when Trey Murphy's coming up and needing a lot of money. And, you did that Herb Jones deal early on because it'll pay off better in the future. They're thinking about those sorts of things. So the long-term planning, I think, is something that they already know. So if they were intent on trading CJ after this year, based off of this year, they already were. If they were intent on keeping him, I don't think this real poor playoff series from him is going to change anything with that. Same for Brandon Ingram. And I'm sure that's going to infuriate a lot of you. And I get it, right? This looks not good. And you can't just run this back, right? What I'm also trying to say is I don't think they're also going to come out and just be like, look at what we could have done with injuries. When I say you're evaluating the whole season, and I should have made this point earlier, you had 49 wins. That's good, but it was also good enough for just the 8th seed in the play-in tournament berth. Now, I don't think anyone would have expected that going into the year. Certainly, that would have been a top 4 seed almost any other year. But it wasn't this year. So the West is stacked. The West is loaded. You kind of saw how this was shaping up the whole year long. So looking at it from that, they know all of this stuff, right? They have that. And when you look at how this team performed against some of the top level competition, the Boston Celtics, the teams like the Thunder in the regular season, even the Nuggets, right? Like they weren't winning those games with regularity. There were some nice wins here and there, don't get me wrong, but you weren't truly beating a lot of the top teams regularly. You were beating up on very subpar competition, which is good. Do that, right? We're not complaining, but I think they know that there was a ceiling here. And as the season went on, one of the things I talked about was if they reach their potential, not when they reach their potential. It was an if, and they hadn't. And I think the fact that you didn't doesn't mean, well, let's try and reach it next year. It should have happened this year. It didn't. So we can't just run it back with the same group because that would be a little bit of madness. So here's what we're going to talk about in the next segment. What's the order of operations? What's the order of operations on how you go about changing this team? Is it a center spot? Is it Zion or Ingram? Is it coaching? Is it a point guard? What's the order they're going to try and work in? That's what I want to look at coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. There's the 2024 Nissan Rogue, which is perfect for city drives and great escapes. And class-exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. So gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. There's also the Nissan Armada, which will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Nissan Armada. So take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Armada, or the Nissan Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by the game that I cannot stop playing. All right, we got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. We've talked about that. Bad ref calls. We've talked about that here. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new plane pieces to travel the boards with. There's also a New Orleans board, by the way. Emojis for taunting your friends and smashing their buildings when you heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, and a ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or when you rent charge rent to your friends. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it free on the Google Play or App Store, and game on. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We are also available on YouTube as well, where there's almost 10,000 Pelicans fans, the #1 Pelicans podcast. Please subscribe. Tell your friends about the show too. Again, sweep or no sweep, I don't think it matters. I think clearly this team needs a shakeup, and you're going to start to see something. You're going to start to see the wheels moving with all of that. By the way, for your second listen today, Locked On Saints, Ross Jackson breaking down everything black and gold here for you after the draft. Taking a QB, not Michael Pratt, but Spencer Rattler. Is that the move? He's going to be covering it all over the Locked On Saints podcast. So like I said, I think the wheels are already in motion for them to make some changes. The wheels have been in motion for a while. Don't forget, this past offseason, they were looking at trading one of Zion or Brandon Ingram to try and go get Scoot Henderson in the draft. That's a pretty significant change. Going back a year before that, this one was like somewhat reported or was reported more recently during the offseason. I think it was Mark Stein from his newsletter saying not this past offseason, the one before that, they looked at, kind of fielding calls for Zion Williamson's trade value around the league. They're willing to potentially make some big changes here, I think. They've just got to kind of find the right deal. That's a small market doing its due diligence. But at a certain point, look, if there's only one deal on the table, you got to take it. So here's what I think they're going to look at doing. And it starts with the center position. They were trying to get something done during the offseason. They were trying to really get something done at the trade deadline, but that ended up being a bit of a quieter trade deadline than we were expecting. And while I don't think that Daniel Gafford was like that big of a difference maker, they could have gotten him. They decided not to, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just didn't want him in the first place. I don't have intel on that one. But that would have been a good move to make in hindsight with that, especially with how they're using JV and how JV has kind of been schemed out of things and just doesn't fit for what you want in kind of a playoff center here and around Zion Williamson. So that's going to be different, right? That's going to be different. He is a free agent. He's just going to leave. There's an amount of money the Pelicans could throw at him to probably get him to stay, but you would never actually do that. I don't even think he probably wants to be here given his usage and wants to go find another team that's going to let him play because this can't be that fun of a situation for him. So when you look at it from that perspective, they think that a different type of center is really going to unlock things, whether it's a stretch big, a big that shoots threes really well. Miles Turner just had a great game. There's a couple others you can get there. A little bit more athleticism to defend on the perimeter the way they want, or even just give you more rim protection in the first place, which allows you to maybe change your defensive scheme enough to not always be switching like they're doing right now, which is getting Shai Gilgeous-Alexander advantageous matchups. And they switch to not allow teams to get into the paint. But it also means Shai can hunt on guys like CJ and others. So it maybe changes your defense a little bit and can make you more elite. That would be a very good thing. You also just have a guy that could be active or more elite in the dunker spot. Just get him the ball and let him go up with it. Vertical spacing, while not as important as three-point spacing, is still very much a thing. And that could be really good. So I think they feel that will really change their fortunes. I disagree to an extent. I think we've seen enough this season that Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram really don't click. And look, this is coming from a guy that once a year would do a show that's like, no, Zion and BI do fit. I don't feel that way right now with how we've seen them play and what we've seen from Ingram in this postseason run. So I think they're going to hope that the center spot is the thing that just really changes it. And maybe Brandon Ingram changes his shot selection, his play style, and they can go back to doing an offense that they want to run. If and when that doesn't work, let's say, that's when they're going to then look at changing the head coach, right? This is the order you go in. You don't just rush to surgery necessarily. Sometimes you try and do other things first. And first is going to be changing the center position. If that doesn't work, then I wouldn't be shocked if they make a coaching change. I wouldn't be shocked if there's some coaching changes on the staff coming off season. They've got to do something there. So I think you'll see a mix of that a little bit, some changes there. And then if that doesn't work, that's when maybe at the trade deadline you look at moving on from Brandon Ingram or Zion Williamson. The thing with Ingram, and I got to look this up because I don't have it, and if someone happens to know, let me know in the comments down below, is, you have to have him under team control if you want to trade him at the next trade deadline. Otherwise, he's a free agent right now, and whoever's trading for him only gets him for 2-3 months, and that's going to lower your trade value for him significantly. But if he's on a new deal that's got 4 or 5 more years after this season, that's pretty significant, and that gives teams a lot of security in trading assets for a guy like that, and that's maybe where a deal would get done. So if they extend him this offseason, it's potentially with an eye on moving him around the NBA's trade deadline and seeing where this team is with a new center first. And if that doesn't work, then let's make more dramatic changes. But you're not going to be able to move him at next year's trade deadline unless he has that long-term deal in place. Otherwise, you're going to get no offers for him. You trade him right now for certain guys. I don't think the return's going to be what you want. When they called about Jarrett Allen, trying to get him from the Cleveland Cavaliers at the trade deadline, they said, we'll give you Jarrett Allen for Brandon Ingram. That doesn't seem like the right trade for me for New Orleans, right? You want to get that center to pair with all of these guys, not by sending one of them out. And so that's where I think getting a deal done can be sticky, particularly around Brandon Ingram. So their most likely course of action is to extend him. Now, I got to look it up. And again, if someone knows, tell me in the comments down below. I think if you do one of those extensions, one of the designated player extensions, it has a 1-year no trade clause in there, but that might be different. And it might only depend on, what the amount is. If he's getting a max, it might be that. And so I think that's one thing to keep an eye on. And if they do that and then they're not allowed to trade him, well, then you're stuck with this group for another year unless you're going to trade Zion Williamson. And I think after the season that Zion had, we saw that's probably not going to be it. So this goes back to the first segment because, as I'm saying, I don't think this postseason is really kind of changing anything I just said. If you want to trade Brandon Ingram, him having more time on his deal is only going to help you do that. So what I mean is him having a bad postseason doesn't really change that they're going to just try and move him right now. I think they're going to still extend him. It's going to look, the optics of that, I think to a lot of fans will look negative. But I think it's also with, hey, we can trade him later and we'll actually get more in return for him because of him having more time on his contract. So it's maybe setting up one domino to get to another domino further down the line. And I think that's an important thing. And that's a small market team just doing small market team things that they need to do to be able to survive. When you look at a team like the Milwaukee Bucks, they did something like this too, during the season, right? They first brought in Damian Lillard, and then that wasn't going too well. So what's the next thing you can do? It's not like you can flip Giannis, flip Dame. It's not like you could really change that roster over anymore. So they fired their head coach. And they brought in Doc Rivers, and that certainly wasn't the move, right? Last year they felt something was a little bit off, so they got rid of Coach Bud and brought in, Adrian Griffin, who they then fired for Doc Rivers. They made changes from that. So the blueprint out there of what you do, the steps you take certainly can be there. And trading away Jrue Holiday for Damian Lillard didn't necessarily work out. So you've got to make sure you find the right move. Otherwise, things start to feel like they cascade a little bit on you and snowball on you. And that is not a great situation to be in. I think the Bucks lost. Yeah, they're down 3-1 right now. Now they're super banged up and it doesn't ultimately matter. But it's worth keeping in mind. There will be some changes coming in the future. It might not be this exact offseason, but whatever course of action it is, I think the Pelicans front office is probably kind of already decided upon and they'll have an idea of what to do. It just might not be what you like because you're looking at this playoff run and they're looking at the whole season, but they're also looking a year or two ahead. But it won't be the same coming back. You're at least going to have a new starting center at the minimum, I think. And that's going to be an important thing. And we'll see if that actually works or not. And if it doesn't, there's no excuses then from making a more significant change at that point in time. So coming up next, let's actually talk about this game. Game 4 in New Orleans. We're going to see how this one's going to go. I'm going to give you a couple things to expect and maybe some changes that you're going to see from Willie Green because he gave us a little bit of an idea of what maybe is going to be coming. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by DoorDash. This Mother's Day, get something thoughtful for mom on DoorDash. Surprise her from wherever you are with a fresh bouquet of flowers, the latest tech, gift cards, self-care treats, and more to make her day that much better. Does your mom have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast, right? No matter whatever she's into, you can make her smile. A flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout wear, and more. Put flowers with a gift card, right? The other great thing here is you can choose same-day delivery, or you can schedule a week ahead for when flowers and gifts should arrive to her door with DoorDash. Be a good son. Treat your mom on Mother's Day by using DoorDash to make it all easier for you. So get a Mother's Day gift as unique as she is with DoorDash when you use code LOCKEDONNBA for 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now on DoorDash. That's promo code LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join almost 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know. And we're going to be looking at the offseason a lot. If you listen to the live show after Game 3 on Saturday, we were workshopping some episodes that you're going to hear. We're going to look at what happened to the offense. They brought in James Borrego. Shouldn't they be running something more? I'm going to tell you exactly what happened with that. I told you in yesterday's show, we're going to do a whole show about it as well. So please subscribe, tell a friend about it. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And by the way, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So there's an actual game. We're not talking a ton about it because Pelicans, if you're a Pelicans fan, you're not feeling very confident going into this one, I don't think. And that's very understandable. And, there's jokes to be made. I've seen the jokes about the funeral and everything. They're wearing the City Edition jerseys and all of that. That's not going to factor into anything here. And I think you're still going to get a good crowd that knows what's going on, because even though that game was disappointing on Saturday, the crowd that was in there, brought it. I truly think everyone who was in there, knew the stakes of that game and how important it was going to be for the Pelicans to try and win that one. And I think that was a really great thing to see. Didn't end up with the results we wanted. There were some empty seats, certainly. But the people that show up, they know what's up and they're ready for it all. And I think you'll see that same kind of attitude from the crowd. And it's 50% off concessions for the 2 hours before tip-off again. So are there going to be some changes? There, I think, are. I think you're going to see Hawkins be one of the first guys in off the bench in this game. I talked about it in the show the other day that if CJ's going to struggle, you've got to have a quicker leash on him. They didn't in that game. And I think Willie Green kind of realizes it. You can't be held to what you were in that game and expect to win no matter how good your defense is going to be. Defenses are at a disadvantage here, and you're playing one of the better offenses. You need to try and score. It's really as simple as that. And Willie Green said after practice the other day that, maybe, he's we'll consider adding in some more shooting. That means Matt Ryan or hopefully Jordan Hawkins. And it would be better if that Hawkins was ready for this moment, right? The lack of development there is certainly hurt, I think. Where do you feel you can trust him in this moment? And the answer is probably no, right? He's a rookie who hasn't really played much in the past month, 2 months, and you're going to throw him into a playoff game. We'll see if this actually happens. That's not an ideal scenario for him to go in and succeed, right? You would have liked to have steadily gotten him playing time this season so that in this moment where you need him, he'd be ready to go, and that just simply isn't the case. So that's a little bit disappointing about how we got here, and it's why in the live show after the game on Saturday, I said, the Pelicans only have themselves to blame for, why they're in the situation that they're in right now. So I think you'll still see that. I think you're going to see them go with a bit of a different defensive scheme again to try and slow down. I can't speak today. Slow down Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And I liked what they did. I thought they did a good enough job on him in game 3. Let anyone else beat you. If Giddey scores 21, Giddey scores 21. If that's how you lose, that's how you lose. It's fine. So I think you'll see some of those type of changes. I would not be shocked if they go with Jonas Valanciunas more. He's getting killed defensively out there. Really isn't fitting. And Chet's actually doing a good job of him one-on-one. And if you have to post him up however many times to score however many points, that's not how the Pelicans win this game. But at a certain point, maybe you just need to try it and see what happens because they haven't done that consistently. So maybe you'll see them do that a little bit more. It's game 4. What you've done these first 3 games has not worked at all. So it's time to really mix things up. And that's what I think you'll see. It'd be great if we could get one really strong Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum playoff game, but I don't know if that's going to happen here. And regardless, I don't think winning or losing, being swept or losing in 5 makes much of a difference, right? You're going out in the first round. Simple as that. What I want to see more than anything in this is the team play with some pride, and I don't think you've seen a ton of that, after game 1. Game 2, game 3, they looked done. They looked a little bit done, and that's not what you want the team you root for to be doing. You don't want them to be thinking about where on the beach they're going to be in a week or so. You want them to go out and think they can, come back from 0-3 down, and no one does this. But that's what you want them to try and do in the attitude that they need to try and have. And I think you'll see a lot of fight from them here, and hopefully we're just proud of them no matter what happens, even if they lose. But that's where it's trending right now. I think they just don't match up well with OKC. They don't seem to have some answers. And I think that the front office already knows that, and they're going to make some changes this offseason and then start making changes to make some changes further down the line. That made sense, didn't it? You get what I'm trying to say? So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate y'all so much for listening. We will be live after game 4. Win or lose, there's going to be a live show as soon as I'm home. So that'll be around 10 p.m. or so is what I'm guessing. 10 or 11 is when I think it'll end up going live. So I will be there with y'all once you're home if you want to make sense of the season, that game. I kind of have a win planned out and a loss planned out on what we're going to say. So hopefully we can go with the win show here, and that would be a lot of fun. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I'm Jake Madison at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow to recap the season or Pelicans win, one of the two. We'll find out what it's going to be, and I'll see y'all then.